Part 1. The Descent into Shadow. The air in the Pilsen loft was a tomb for dead things. It smelled of turpentine, linseed oil, and the slow, patient decay of neglect. Dust motes danced in the weak shafts of sunlight that fought their way through the grime-caked windows, illuminating a graveyard of artistic ambition. Canvases, once primed for life, stood blank and accusing against the walls. Palettes lay scattered, their vibrant daubs of paint now crusted, dull and brittle in the center of it all. Aurelie Vance sat motionless on a wooden stool, a ghost haunting her own life. She stared at a large, empty canvas propped on an easel, but her eyes saw nothing of its blank, white promise. They were turned inward, fixed on the vast, gray emptiness that had consumed her from the inside out. It was a pressure, a physical weight on her chest that made every breath a conscious effort. Anhedonia. The doctors had given her a word for it, a neat clinical label for the theft of all joy. But the word did not capture the hollowness, the profound silence where color and feeling used to live. Her gaze drifted to a small, framed photograph on a nearby table, almost completely obscured by dust. A simple wipe with her sleeve revealed two faces, bright with laughter, her own and Lily's, Millennium Park. The silver bean sculpture warped their reflections into a funhouse mirror of joy, a memory so sharp it was a physical pain. The image fractured. The bright Chicago sun dissolved into the dappled, treacherous light of a forest trail. The scent of turpentine became the damp, loamy smell of the earth after a rain. Lily was ahead of her, her red backpack a vibrant slash of color against the greens and browns. She was scrambling up a rocky outcrop, turning back to laugh, her voice echoing through the trees. "Come on, slowpoke. The view from up here is going to be epic." Aurelie had been fumbling with her camera, trying to capture the light. The moment. "Hold on," she'd called out, not looking up. "Just let me get this shot." A sound, not a scream, just a surprised gasp, followed by the sickening slide of loose rock and a heavy, final thud. When Aurelie looked up, the flash of red was gone. The world had gone silent. The memory was never whole. Just those fragments, the camera in her hand, the sound, the silence, the frantic scramble up the rocks to find her sister lying in a way no living body should lie. If I hadn't been looking at the camera, if I had been watching her, if. The word was a hammer, beating against the inside of her skull, a rhythm of guilt that never stopped. She squeezed her eyes shut, pushing the memory away. Her hand went to a small wooden box tucked into a drawer of her work table. She didn't need to open it. She knew the weight of the velvet box inside, the cold, hard promise of the diamond ring it held. It brought another voice, this one laced with a desperate, frustrated logic. Mark's voice. "It's been a year. Aurelie, you have to move on." She could see him, standing right where the easel now stood, his architect's mind trying to construct a blueprint for her grief. A problem to be solved with timelines and rational steps. He didn't understand that grief wasn't a structure to be built or demolished. It was a flood, and she was at the bottom of the ocean. Her body felt like it was moving through water, heavy and slow. She stood, her joints aching from disuse, and walked into the small living area of the loft. The silence was absolute. It was later now, evening. A hard, cold rain began to fall, drumming against the large windows, each drop amplifying the void inside the apartment. A key turned in the lock. Mark. He stood in the doorway, dripping, holding a bag of takeout that felt like a pathetic peace offering. He was here to check on her. Another item on his to-do list. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the dust, the empty canvases, the unwashed dishes. It was the same look of disappointment he'd worn for months. "Orally," he began, his voice tight. "We need to talk." She said nothing, just stood there, a statue carved from apathy. I can't do this anymore," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. He wasn't cruel, just a man pushed past his limit. "I love you. I love the woman I was going to marry, the artist, the one who laughed. But she's gone, and I don't know how to get her back." He paced the small space, his hands gesturing, trying to reason with the unreasonable. "This grief, it's a sickness, Orly, and you're not fighting it, you're letting it win. You need professional help, a plan. You can't just disappear like this." His words were meant to be a lifeline, but to her, they were stones. Each one dragged her deeper. He was confirming her deepest, most terrifying fear: she was broken, a burden, a ghost haunting the living. "I love you," he said again, his voice cracking with a pain of his own, a pain she was too numb to acknowledge. "But I can't fix you, and I can't live with a ghost." He walked to the small kitchen counter, his movements stiff. He took the apartment key from his keychain and placed it on the granite with a soft, final click. The sound echoed in the silence, a period at the end of a long, miserable sentence. Then he turned and walked out, closing the door behind him, leaving her alone with the rain and the silence, which was now absolute and terrifying. For a long time, she didn't move. The grief that had been a roiling ocean inside her suddenly receded, leaving behind a dead, frozen calm. The loop of guilt stopped. The pain vanished. In its place was a single, cold, clear thought, a resolve. It was not a decision born of passion or despair, but of a quiet, chilling logic. It was a release, an apology, a way to finally stop being a burden. She walked to her closet, pulling on a dark coat. She didn't bother with a scarf or gloves. She moved through the apartment with a mechanical purpose, a ghost finally heading home. She walked out the door, not looking back at the dead studio or the key on the counter, and stepped into the cold Chicago night. The walk to the Kinsey Street Bridge was a dream. The city lights glittered, beautiful and distant, like stars in a galaxy she no longer belonged to. The wind whipped off the river, biting and raw, but she didn't feel the cold. She was insulated by her purpose. She was a machine executing its final command. The bridge was deserted, a skeleton of black steel against the bruised purple sky. Below, the Chicago River churned, a ribbon of black ink reflecting the indifferent city lights. She stopped in the middle, her hands gripping the cold, wet railing. She looked down at the hypnotic movement of the water. There was no chaos in her mind, only a strange, profound peace. This was the only way to end the pain. This was the only apology Lily would hear. She swung a leg over the railing, then the other. She stood on the narrow ledge, the wind tearing at her coat, pressing her back against the metal. The city spread out before her, a breathtaking panorama of light and life that felt utterly alien. It was beautiful, but it wasn't for her anymore. She closed her eyes, and a single image bloomed in the darkness, Lily's smiling face in Millennium Park. She took a breath of the icy air and let it out in 2 soft words, a whisper stolen by the wind. "I'm sorry, Lily," and then she let go. Part 2, a glimmer in the darkness. The miracle was not a choir of angels or a blinding flash of divine light. It was the rasp of a cough and the simple, human instinct not to look away. Under the Kinsey Street Bridge, sheltered from the worst of the wind, Elias huddled in a cocoon of scavenged blankets. He was a quiet observer of the city, a man whose presence was as overlooked as the discarded newspapers that served as his mattress. He saw the dark shape on the bridge above, a brief, unsteady silhouette against the city glow. He saw it disappear. He heard the splash of violent, ugly sound that tore through the night's rhythm. He didn't think about God. He didn't think about anything at all. He just moved, scrambling from his shelter, his old joints protesting. He rushed to the concrete embankment. There, in the freezing, churning water, was a body, a girl. Her dark coat was spread out like broken wings. He acted on an instinct older than theology. He spotted a thick, discarded length of rope nearby, left by a construction crew. He grabbed it, his numb fingers fumbling, and scrambled down the slick concrete steps to the river's edge. The shock of the frigid water had knocked Orly unconscious, a cruel mercy that also slowed her body's vital functions. Clinging to life, Elias managed to loop the rope under her arms and, with a strength born of pure adrenaline, hauled. He wasn't strong enough to pull her completely out, but he dragged her torso onto the lower lip of the embankment, her head and shoulders safely out of the current that would have swept her away. She was a dead weight, her face pale and blue in the gloom. He saw a police car cruising slowly down Wacker Drive. He waved his arms, a frantic, desperate windmill. "Help," he croaked, his voice raw. "Girl in the water, help." The car screeched to a halt. He stayed, a silent, anonymous guardian, as the officers and then the paramedics worked, their movements urgent and professional. Once he saw she was in their hands, he faded back into the shadows of the city, his work done. He was God's touch, delivered through the most humble of hands. The first thing Orly knew was a different kind of silence. Not the heavy, accusing silence of her apartment, but a sterile quiet punctuated by the rhythmic, electronic beep of a machine. Her eyelids were heavy, gritty. She peeled them open to a world of pale white ceilings and the smell of antiseptic. A tube was in her nose. An IV line was taped to the back of her hand. Her first feeling was not relief, not gratitude, but a wave of profound, soul-crushing failure. She couldn't even die right. A figure stirred in the chair beside her bed. Her brother, David. His face was a wreck, a mixture of raw fear, exhausted relief, and a simmering anger. He looked as if he hadn't slept in days. Orly. Her name was a choked whisper. "Oh, God, you're awake." Their conversation was strained, a minefield of unspoken accusations and terrified love. He was all practicalities, the financial analyst trying to manage a crisis. He talked about psychiatrists and medication, about getting her into a program. He treated her like a volatile asset, a problem to be solved and secured. "We'll fix this, Aura. We'll get you the best help." He didn't understand. She wasn't a problem to be solved. She was a void. He stepped out to talk to a doctor, his energy too frantic for the quiet room. In his absence, the door opened softly. A man in a simple black shirt with a white clerical collar stepped inside. He was older, with kind eyes and a face etched with a patient calm. "Orly Vance," he asked gently. He saw the fear in her eyes and held up a hand. "It's all right. My name is Father Michael. I'm the priest from St. Jude's Chapel." He explained that the man who found her had mentioned being from near St. Jude's, and the hospital's chaplaincy service had made the connection. Orly braced herself for a lecture, for judgment, for talk of sin and damnation, but it never came. He simply pulled the visitor's chair a little closer, sat down, and folded his hands. He didn't preach. He didn't pry. He just sat with her in the beeping silence for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice quiet and unassuming. "I'm just glad you're still with us." His simple, humane presence was a stark, bewildering contrast to David's frantic problem-solving. It asked nothing of her. It simply acknowledged her existence. In the wreckage of her failure, a tiny, unfamiliar flicker of curiosity ignited. Days later, she was discharged into David's care. His apartment was clean, minimalist, and suffocating. He watched her constantly, his concern a heavy blanket she couldn't breathe under. She felt utterly lost, a ghost rattling around in someone else's life. The name, however, stuck in her mind: St. Jude's. St. Jude, the patron saint of lost causes. The irony was not lost on her. On an impulse she couldn't explain, while David was at work, she left his apartment. She took the L train, the rattling journey a familiar Chicago rhythm, and followed the directions on her phone to a quieter part of the city. She found the church. It was not a grand cathedral, but an old, beautiful stone building, a pocket of deep peace nestled among brick townhouses. It seemed to absorb the city's noise. She hesitated on the sidewalk, a strange fear and a stronger pull warring within her. Finally, she took a breath and pushed open the heavy, dark wooden doors. The world inside was different. The air was cool and still, carrying the scent of old wood, beeswax, and a faint, sweet trace of incense. The chaotic city noise vanished, replaced by a profound and reverent silence. And there was light. It wasn't the harsh, judgmental light of the hospital or the weak, dusty light of her studio. It was a living light, filtered through magnificent stained glass windows, painting the dark wooden pews in shifting pools of sapphire, ruby, and emerald. It was the first time she had felt a sense of awe, rather than dread, in over a year. She saw a figure near the altar, lighting a row of votive candles. It was Father Michael. He looked up, saw her standing in the doorway, and offered a gentle smile of recognition that held no surprise. Only a quiet welcome. He didn't pressure her, didn't ask what she was doing there. After a few moments of comfortable silence, he simply said, "We have a community dinner in the basement on Wednesdays. Simple soup and bread. You're welcome to join us, if you'd like." Hesitantly, not knowing why, she agreed. The basement hall was the opposite of the chapel above, noisy, bright with fluorescent lights, and filled with a sprawling, diverse group of people. Old men playing chess, young mothers with toddlers, students, professionals, a cross-section of the neighborhood. She felt like an alien, an imposter, and was about to retreat when a woman with a warm, open face and streaks of gray in her dark hair sat down across from her at a long folding table. "You're new," the woman said, her voice direct but kind. "I'm Clara. Don't worry, nobody bites." Clara Mendoza didn't pry. She didn't ask orally why she was there or what her story was. Instead, she shared a small piece of her own. "I started coming here after my husband, Carlos, passed away," she said, stirring her soup. "Everyone kept telling me I had to get over it. But you don't get over it. It becomes a part of you. This place, these people, they taught me how to carry it, how to learn to live with the empty space." For the first time, Orally heard someone echo the landscape of her own heart, but with a tone of acceptance, not despair, not a problem to be fixed, but a weight to be carried. The words settled in her, a balm on a wound she thought was fatal. They ate their soup in a comfortable quiet. Before leaving, Orally saw a stack of dirty bowls on a nearby table. Without thinking, she stood up, gathered them, and carried them to the kitchen sink. It was a tiny, mundane act. But as she rinsed the bowls under the warm water, she realized it was the first purposeful, helpful thing she had done in months. A single, small step out of the void. Part 3. Wrestling with Angels and Demons. The light in St. Jude's, the unexpected kindness in Clara's words, they followed Orally home. For the first time in more than a year, a familiar itch started in her fingers. It wasn't inspiration, not yet, but a flicker of the old impulse, the need to translate the world into color and form. She returned to her loft, the air still thick with neglect, but now she saw it as a challenge, not a sentence. She went out and bought new paints, new brushes, the crisp smell of the fresh supplies a ghost of a forgotten joy. She confronted a blank canvas. She intended to paint the light, the jewel-toned warmth of the stained glass windows. She squeezed cadmium yellow and cerulean blue onto her palette, but when the brush touched the canvas, her hand betrayed her. It was not light that emerged. It was a maelstrom. Her arm moved with a violent, desperate energy she didn't know she possessed. The brush strokes were slashes, gouges, dark, swirling indigos and blacks poured onto the canvas, forming the churning, menacing water of the Chicago River. Twisted, jagged lines of metallic gray became the cold steel of the bridge. And in the center of the chaos, a face began to form in the water, a ghostly, terrified visage with wide, hollow eyes and a mouth open in a silent scream. It was her face. It was Lily's face. It was both, melded together in a shared agony. The act of painting was not creation. It was an exorcism. She was vomiting her trauma onto the canvas, giving shape to the horror that had lived silently inside her for so long. She worked for hours, oblivious to time, fueled by a raw, furious energy. When at last she was done, she stepped back, her entire body trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at the raw, agonizing image she had created. The darkness, the terror, the guilt, it was all there, staring back at her. And something inside her finally broke. A dam of unshed tears burst, and she collapsed to the floor, sobbing with a depth of pain she hadn't even been able to access before. A wrenching, full-bodied grief that left her empty and shaking on the dusty floor of her studio. Shaken, raw, and now angry. She stormed out of the apartment, the disturbing painting still wet on its easel. She went straight to St. Jude's and found Father Michael in his small, book-lined office. She stood before him, trembling not with cold, but with rage. This was the theological climax she hadn't known she was heading for. "Where was he?" she demanded, her voice tight and accusatory. "Where was this God of yours when my sister fell? Why did he stand by and do nothing? Why did he let me suffer so much that I wanted to die on that bridge? Is this some kind of cruel joke? You survive, but I'll make sure you never forget why you wanted to die in the first place. What kind of God does that?" Her questions were not philosophical. They were raw wounds. Father Michael didn't flinch. He didn't offer platitudes about mysterious ways or divine plans. He just listened, his gaze steady and empathetic, letting her pour out all the poison. He let the anger fill the room until it had exhausted itself, leaving only a ragged, painful silence. Then he leaned forward. "Those are the right questions, orally," he said softly. "They are the only questions that matter, and I don't have easy answers for you." He paused, his eyes looking past her into a memory of his own. "When I was a young man, my mother died of cancer, a slow, terrible illness. I was furious with God. I yelled all the same questions into the silence that you just yelled at me. I felt abandoned, betrayed." He met her eyes again, and she saw not a priest, but a man who understood the territory of her despair. "Faith isn't a shield from suffering, orally," he said, his voice gaining a quiet intensity. "It never has been. It's the belief that you are not alone in the suffering. It's the light you can't see, but you trust is there, even in the deepest dark. God wasn't on the hiking trail keeping Lily from falling. He was in the heart of the homeless man who pulled you from the river. He's here, in this room, sitting with you in your anger and your doubt. He doesn't take the pain away. He gives you the strength to carry it. He didn't solve her problem. He validated it. He sat with her in her doubt, giving it dignity and space. The confrontation left her drained but strangely settled. The anger was gone, replaced by a fragile, tentative quiet. But her world was not done testing her. A few days later, her brother David showed up at her apartment. He had a key she'd given him after the hospital. He'd seen the painting. It had terrified him. Orally, "We need to talk about this," he said, his voice strained with worry. He gestured at the canvas, which she had turned to face the wall. "And this church thing, I'm worried about you." He began to pace, just as Mark had, but his concern was different. It was the fierce, protective love of a brother who thought she was losing her mind. "Look, we weren't raised this way. Mom and Dad believed in science, in reason. You're just replacing one problem with another. You're leaning on a crutch, a delusion, because it's easier than doing the real work. You need a therapist, orally, not a priest." The argument grew heated. He pushed her to reconnect with her old life, her gallery contacts, her friends. He was trying to pull her back to a world that no longer fit, a life whose logic had shattered on the rocks with her sister. His arguments were sharp and compelling. From his perspective, he wasn't wrong. The pressure forced Orally to find her own words, to articulate the fragile, unproven thing that was growing inside her. It wasn't a doctrine she could recite. It was an experience. "David, I hear you," she said, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through his anxious speech. "But you don't understand. My old life, the one you want me to go back to, that's what broke me. That's what left me on that bridge. This is different. It's not a delusion. It's a glimmer, a possibility that I'm not just a collection of mistakes and tragedies. It's the only way forward I can see." She was making a choice. It was a choice between the logical, familiar world her brother represented and the inexplicable, frightening, but deeply resonant path she was now on. She was choosing the glimmer. Part 4. The dawn of a new creation. The confrontation with David, instead of breaking her, fortified her. His logical arguments had forced her to claim her own illogical hope. Reeling, but with a new sense of clarity, she returned to her studio. She turned the dark, traumatic painting from the easel to face her. The screaming face, the black water, the twisted bridge, it was the truth of her despair. And she knew, with a certainty that came from a place deeper than thought, that she could not erase it. She picked up a brush, but this time, the act was different. It was not an exorcism, but an integration. She did not paint over the dark water. Instead, with delicate strokes of white and gold, she painted shards of light hitting its surface, transforming the churning menace into something deep and mysterious. She did not erase the ghostly, agonized face. She refined it, softened it. She gave Lily's features a look of profound peace and her own a look of hard-won acceptance. And above the twisted steel of the Kinsey Street Bridge, she painted the sun, a glorious burst of orange and pink breaking through the night. She was not denying the darkness. She was depicting grace within it. The final piece was a testament to the coexistence of pain and hope, shadow and light. When she was finished, she stepped back and looked at it. She knew its name instantly, Morning on the River. The act of finishing the painting was not just an artistic breakthrough. It was an act of self-forgiveness, a profound moment of spiritual release. The weight on her chest had not vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer a crushing stone. It was a weight she now had the strength to carry. A week later, she invited David to meet her at a neutral coffee shop, away from the charged atmosphere of her studio. She didn't try to explain with words. She simply slid her phone across the table, showing him a photograph of the finished painting. He stared at it, his mouth slightly open. He was stunned. He saw the darkness, the lingering image of the fall, the bridge. But he also saw the light, the impossible sunrise, the look of peace on the faces. He didn't understand her faith, not in the way she was beginning to, but he saw its fruit. He saw that she was no longer drowning. He saw that her art, the very core of her soul, had returned not as it was, but transformed, deeper and more powerful than before. "Aura," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's beautiful." He looked up from the phone, his eyes meeting hers. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for trying to force my solutions on you. I was just so scared of losing you." Their relationship, fractured by grief and misunderstanding, began to mend, built on a new foundation of mutual respect. Her next journey was back to the bridge. It took her several days of returning to the river walk, but she finally found him. Elias was huddled in a different spot, a little further down, a familiar silhouette against the concrete. She didn't just hand him money and walk away. She approached quietly, holding 2 steaming containers of soup and a bag with a thick, warm blanket. "Elias," she asked softly. He looked up, his eyes wary. "I'm Aurelie," she said, sitting down a respectful distance away. "You pulled me out of the river a while ago." She offered him one of the containers. "I wanted to thank you. You saved my life." He took the soup, his gaze searching her face. They sat in silence for a while, eating the hot meal together. She didn't push or pry, but she stayed. She asked him his story and listened. It was a quiet, powerful moment of 2 souls, once lost in their own ways, connecting in a shared, simple humanity. She was closing the loop, not with a grand gesture, but with a humble act of gratitude and recognition. Several months later, the basement hall of St. Jude's was unrecognizable. The long folding tables were gone, replaced by rows of chairs. The walls, usually bare, were adorned with her paintings. It was a small, temporary gallery exhibit of her new work, titled "Light in the Shadowlands." At the very center, illuminated by a pair of spotlights, was morning on the river. The room was filled with the warm chatter of the community. Clara was there, beaming, and Father Michael stood near the back with a quiet, proud smile. Near the front, looking awkward but undeniably proud, was David. Aurelie stood at a simple wooden podium at the front of the room. The woman who had sat motionless in a dusty studio was gone. The ghost who had walked to the Kinsey Street Bridge was gone. In her place stood a woman whose face held the memory of her scars, but whose eyes were clear and bright. She was not giving a sermon. She was giving her testimony. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady. She told her story. She spoke of the consuming love for her sister and the devastating guilt of her loss. She spoke of the despair, the empty canvases, and the cold, final walk to the bridge. She spoke of the inexplicable survival, of waking up in a hospital feeling like a failure, and of the slow, difficult journey of finding hope in a place she never expected to enter. She spoke of her pain without shame, and of her faith without sanctimony. I used to think that healing meant erasing the darkness, pretending it never happened, she said, her gaze sweeping over the faces in the room, over her brother, over her art. But I've learned that's not it. Healing isn't about getting rid of the scars. It's about letting the light in to shine through them. She stood beside her art, a living testament to her own words. Proof that a new life can begin, not when the darkness is defeated, but when you finally find the light that was there, waiting all along.